This is a talking point that, it existed the day Lincoln Riley came to USC, and it's something you briefly alluded to. This guy is from Muleshoe, Texas. He's coached at Oklahoma for the past several years, and going to Los Angeles is, a culture shock. But, Lincoln Riley's a big boy coach, made 3 straight playoffs, won all those Big 12 championships. He was playing in the college football playoff semifinals 3 years running. He was on the biggest stage. Just in hindsight, not to relitigate, should USC have hired Lincoln Riley? Not trying to go there, not at all, because that was a home run hire. We were all incredulous on the day it happened, late November 2021. But in terms of just dealing with that particular point, he's coached in the midsection of America for several years. He's a Texas native. Was there something that perhaps could have and should have been communicated to him? Not that to the extent that it stood in the way of hiring him. Again, I want to be very clear there. But do you think that something slipped through the cracks in terms of imparting on him the importance of building that fence around Southern California, the thing that Clay Helton failed to do? Do you think that just in terms of Lincoln Riley knowing in full what the expectations of the job were, obviously he expected to win national championships and compete at the highest level, but in terms of the job of a USC coach and how you get there and how you do things the way Pete Carroll did, or at least how you get close to the formula Pete Carroll had, do you think something just got lost in translation? Do you think that there's a very specific reason that Lincoln Riley didn't really seem to get it in terms of forging really strong relationships with Southern California coaches? I mean, now things are in order. This is how the operation should be going. We can all see it. We can see Chad Bowden's immense influence, and also Jen Cohen helping to put this infrastructure into place. She deserves a lot of credit for that as well. We talked about it last year, before you were part of this show, but when I was with Tim Prangley, talked a lot about just getting the house in order. That has happened. But do you think that something did get lost or missed or overlooked in terms of telling Lincoln, hey, we love you here, we want you here, but you have to do things in Los Angeles that don't necessarily apply to Oklahoma or other jobs across the country?
Matt, I don't know exactly who to blame for this necessarily, so I'm not going to point fingers at anyone. The closest thing remotely that I can give to an explanation is maybe the athletic director transition had something to do with it, because not a lot of people remember, just because Jen Cohen has come in and done such a home run job. But back when she was not the one who hired Lincoln Riley. It was Mike Bohn that hired Lincoln Riley, and obviously Mike Bohn had some different things kind of swirling around in the media about him, ended up stepping down, and then Jen Cohen gets promoted. And, maybe it was some distraction going on in that seat of the office. That's the only thing I can even begin to speculate, not pointing the fingers at anybody in particular, but just there was, bigger and more serious things going on with that seat of the program that, maybe a little bit less of the focus went towards acclimating Lincoln culturally, and they kind of trusted him more to do his coaching side of things, if that makes sense. But I think that one of the few kind of disappointing aspects of USC Trojan culture pretty consistently is the very reactionary nature of a lot of the people that are affiliated with it. And that's obviously none of our listeners here at the Voice of College Football. We have all the diehards here, obviously. But, there's, I think, and a lot of people blame it on the city, but because there's always, a lot of things happening in LA, a lot of exciting things, and it's, Hollywood, and there's never a dull night. USC fans and even, some of the, alums and higher up, celebrity fans and all of that aren't always the most diehard, and, don't always show up when times aren't going so well. And it feels a little bit like with Lincoln Riley, it was like he needed to prove himself before some of these, people who had been around for a long time and could help him kind of acclimate himself to this program and knew a lot about this program that he probably didn't know were going to show up and support him and kind of give him their stamp of approval. So I think that that's maybe a lesson to be learned here for some of those people. I would certainly like to see a little bit more of an embracing of these people before they've done anything. And I understand that, you don't want to give anybody in this football program, which demands a lot of success, your full, kind of unhesitated support. The USC fans have always demanded accountability, and everyone in the USC program and everyone who's a Trojan always demands, a kind of accountability for winning. And that's understandable, but you don't want that to kind of hold you back in such a way that you don't help these people do, kind of receive and do everything that they can do to win football games. So I think that the only thing that I can think of in that regard that may have made this a bit of a smoother transition is if just more people would have showed up and right away and been like, hey, we're excited about you. You're a winning football coach. Here's like everything about USC football culture. Whether that's guys like, celebrity fans or former players or former coaches, guys who know how to do the job. Some of those guys have shown up, but it seems like they showed up after, Caleb Williams' Heisman winning season and after they had a little bit of success and narrowly missed the college football playoff and not the moment he was hired, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so there's an interesting question that emerges hearing you speak and saying what you've said, and I my dad went to USC, but he went there in the 1960s. John McKay, very different time. So like I can't say personally, I didn't go to USC, unlike you. So I don't think I have the right to say things about the USC community or culture the way you do, because you're a USC Trojan, literally. I'm not. I have a family heritage or connection, but I didn't go to the school directly. But I do sense that that notion about there's so much going on in LA, and the sports dollar, it gets divided in a lot of different ways, and you snap fingers and 100,000 will show up at Tennessee for a cupcake from the Sun Belt, and it just doesn't work the same way at USC. But the really interesting thing that your words really unearthed for me is that when we talk about people not giving Lincoln Riley like his flowers right away, kind of having a kind of a wait and see attitude. My question for you, Ethan, kind of following that up, as though not giving Lincoln Riley total support right off the bat, wanting him to kind of earn it a little bit. That's understandable, especially since he did it at Oklahoma. So like there was the immediate expectation of, hey, we're shooting for the moon right away at USC. We're not trying to ease our way in. 9-3 is not good enough. I get that. Like, in USC fans having high standard, it's one of the things I love about USC fans. Like, they don't accept mediocrity very well. I love that. But in terms of fleshing out that point you made about like not giving him 100% robust support right off the bat and kind of having that little bit of a wait and see attitude, my follow-up, Ethan, is, do you think Lincoln Riley kind of sensed that he was going to be treated like a king? He was going to be received like the big cheese at local Southern California high schools, and that he maybe, like, he didn't feel he'd have to do as much diplomacy. He didn't have to, master his people skills right off the bat, that like Southern California high school coaches would just kind of, want to bring their prospects to USC, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like Alex Grinch, the defense, separate conversation for sure. But, it seems as though Lincoln Riley might have taken for granted just a little bit that, well, of course, the top quarterbacks in Southern California are going to come to USC. Of course, the top receivers, running backs, they're going to want to play for me. Do you think that Lincoln Riley kind of took the market a little bit for granted precisely because of what you said, that not everybody gave him absolute full support. I mean, at least working within that thesis. Do you think that's really kind of why we saw this lag and these struggles and this stagnation over the past few seasons?
That could be it. I mean, it's a good theory that makes a lot of sense for sure. I think we've talked about how at Oklahoma, obviously, he's under Bob Stoops. He's kind of grandfathered into this program that has a great relationship with everybody. You know, everybody loved Bob Stoops. Nobody had a bad thing to say about him. He kind of is, you know, a guy who benefits from being affiliated with Bob Stoops and his great relationships that he has with everyone in Oklahoma. And you know, coming into Southern California, it's obviously not the same deal. And yeah, and I think, you know, it could have been a lot of assumption of, hey, I've produced all these number one overall quarterbacks and all these Heisman winners, and you know, even his first year at USC, he was bringing over a lot of those top recruits that he'd gotten at Oklahoma, and they were following him to USC. And you know, Caleb Williams being one of them, Mario Williams being another, and then Jordan Addison came over after, you know, being the basically one of the best receivers in the country at Pitt. So it's not like that was disproven by the way that everybody kind of immediately followed him on the player side of things, at least in terms of transferring, not necessarily recruits, but in terms of transferring for sure. So I think so. I think that it's also just been an adjustment due to the new nature of college football. He kind of came in right when, you know, NIL was coming onto the scene as well. And I think that immediately kind of seemed to be a big benefit to USC, just given all the NIL opportunities that you can be afforded in Los Angeles. So it seemed like good timing there, but it is just another thing to juggle. That's a big reason why Chad Bowden is in the building in the first place, is because of, you know, kind of the GM nature of having to almost sign players to contracts now instead of just earn their commitment. So I think, you know, there's a variety of things. I think he was probably trying to figure out that new landscape just like everybody else was. But, you know, certainly I think anytime you go from a situation where everybody thinks you're great to a situation where nobody thinks anything of you at all, and in fact is kind of predispositioned to treat you with scrutiny until you prove that you don't deserve scrutiny and you instead deserve, you know, praise and support. That could have been it for sure.